Okay, thank you so much. And it's a pleasure and honor, obviously, to be invited here. We agreed to speak for 20 minutes, so I have here, if you see me looking to the mobile phone, it's not because I'm looking my email, but because I'm looking to the time that is passing. So I try to give my interpretation of this title that is, of course, very near to what I try to do and what I try to think. But even if I really want to answer to this question, I must change it a little bit, because I want to move from rethinking design for social change toward rethinking social change to decide what design can do. Because in my view, the most critical part is not so much a discussion about us. The most critical part is what is happening outside us, or what we are part of. So I think that it's good to arrive to say something about us, moving from something that is outside us, or in any case, we are part of a larger system. So why are we talking about social change? As designers, we are totally accustomed to talk about change and innovation. So in some way, we can say that from the beginning, 1 century ago, design was there to innovate. But at that point, innovation was incredibly simpler than today, because at least in the perception of the people, it was there was a line of progress, and the change, which kind of change has to be done, it was obvious. We had to move from a traditional society, pre-modern society, pre-industrial society, pre-urban society, toward a society that was supposed to be more progress of the previous one. And also, the way to do it was clear that the main driver was technology. So the role of the designer was in some way to humanize technology. So there were so many new technologies, and we have to try to make in a way that people could appreciate it. And why? Because this was the way to help to move from pre-industrial, pre-modern toward modern industrial society. Now, this is not the time to make the overall story that has been complex and contradictory, but let's jump to today. It's not me, but you open a newspaper, and everybody now states that we are in a multiple crisis. And the multiple crisis is the environmental one, that now we are talking about environmental issues since 40 years now, but now everybody touch it in a very practical way. There is a social crisis, because that progress has not generated a more equal society, but it's a society that is more and more diversified in terms of opportunities for people. And there is also, in some way, a political crisis, because well, we can have different opinions, but something is happening that is in some way weakening our democracy, the one in which we believe so much, but we have to say democracy is not in such a good shape in this moment. So we have to see what does it mean to reinforce democracy. And finally, war. I committed myself to not to do any conference in this last month without stopping for a while and saying, look, we are here, we talk, we are safe, we are happy, we eat, and it's correct to do it, but we are in the middle of a catastrophe. And nowadays, the catastrophe is also the war. And the war is a kind of summary of all the other catastrophes. So when we say why we have to change, it's clear that something has to change, because we are sitting in a condition that is going very fastly toward a catastrophic end. Really end, because now we also talk about atomic war. That was a kind of taboo. For a certain number of years, it was impossible to talk about atomic weapons, and now there is a discussion about what will be the implication of using atomic bombs. So this is to say that if we had good reason to talk about design and change years ago, if at that time was design and change through innovation that was supposed to be mainly a technological innovation, toward we had to talk about design and change because we desperately need to change the model. But this change is not only technological, even though it is also technological, but it's also very much social. And therefore, we need to have a social change that, to be more correct, should always be socio-technical change, because there is no social change that do not imply some technology. So here we are. But in the moment in which we said we had to change 1 century ago, it was relatively clear the arrow of the progress. What was the direction? Toward today, the question is, okay, we have to change, but in which direction? Where are we supposed to go? And of course, it has been said, everybody say we have to go towards sustainable society. And nowadays, with all the disaster, because we are already in the catastrophe, we add normally also the resilient society. And it's not this, at least for me, the moment to explain all this kind of story, but each one of us has to, in some way, consciously or unconsciously, in a rational way or emotionally, choose a direction. So the direction is not an engineering issue. It's not given by some algorithm. The direction that we have to choose is a choice. The direction that we want to have is a choice. And this is why we can say that there is a lot of design, because design is defining what we want to do, not only how we want to do. So it's an issue about meaning, not only an issue about solutions. And therefore, we have to choose where we want to go. And I do not develop this too much. I only declare my position, but without explaining it too much, because I don't have the time now. And it's, for me, at the end of the story, we have to move toward a system that has to be based on the idea of collaboration, because the system in which we are have been based on the idea of competing individuals, are be based on the idea of caring, so be capable to be near each other and near to the environment. And I think that at the core of the disaster, both social and environmental, is that we are a careless society, as somebody wrote already some decades ago. So this loss of care, and try to substitute care with some kind of other more technical service, do not create any society. Do not create the yes, it creates the non-society that Madame Thatcher said there is no society, there are only individuals. But we see the disaster of imagining a society that is only done by individuals when we lose the social fabric. Therefore, there is an issue about how to reweave the social fabric, and we can open a discussion. For me, one of the core concepts is caring. And finally, for me, again, these are a number of statements that should be discussed, and also in any case, they are personal. I arrived to this idea of proximity, that again, I cannot explain it now, but for me, proximity is a very designerly word, because in reality, we cannot design care. Care is a human relationship, so there is no way to say you have to care for the other. You are not way to create something that obliges people to be careful. But what we can do is to create a context in which it's more possible and probable, in which it's possible and more probable that people take care for themselves and for the environment. And I think that to have the possibility to take care for each other and for the environment, you need proximity. Because care, as has been written very well by a lady, that is Maria Puig de la Bella Casa, is touching. You cannot care in distance. You have care only if you are in a tactile mood. So if we don't create conditions of proximity, both physical and relational, we will not have possibility to imagine a sustainable, resilient society. Therefore, the strategy to create opportunity of care that cannot be designed pass through the possibility to create conditions of physical proximity that generate the opportunities for people to start to exchange something and, for this reason, to care. And the final issue that has to be discussed for me about the change that we have to do, that is very controversial, also this one, so it's my personal position, is the how. Because just to give you an idea of where I am, I told you what are my ideas about some core keywords of the direction that we should follow. But after there is how we can do it. And we have so we should have, and we have implicitly, even if we don't declare, a model of change, of systemic change. So if we talk about change, it means that we imagine that the systems can change, because otherwise we could not talk about change. So how the system change? And the system we discovered that are hyper-complex. And therefore, what does it mean to change the hyper-complex system? And again, we can work without having all the theory about complexity, but many people do it very well without knowing anything that I'm talking about, because intuitively they do the right thing. But it's, in this moment, it's useful at least to name some element. Looking here, many people say if the system is so complex, it means that there are some hyper artifacts that generate what will be the future. And this hyper artifact is the financial moment, the market, so something that is impossible to really manage. And so the only thing that we have to do is to adapt ourselves to some change that are already going on, done by some machines that are so bigger than us that cannot be changed. I will say that also for the war, they are creating a condition in which it appears that it's impossible not to make the war. And many people say, okay, but if it is like this, what we have to do? We cannot do anything. So every time, and all the neoliberalism ideology was when they say there is no alternative. There is no alternative means there are some machines that are working in a certain direction, and the only thing that we can do is to adapt ourselves. Of course, this is not my position, and I hope that it's not the position of many others. The second one is the most traditional for the modern culture, and design has been born inside modernity. So in our DNA, there is a lot of idea that, okay, again, consciously or not, we use. And the idea of modernity was, yes, maybe the system is complex, but we can simplify it. And we can act on the reality as it was a machine. And if it is a machine, you know the metaphor of the spaceship, Earth. So the Earth as a big machine, it accepts the limited resources, it accepts everything, but a spaceship is a machine. And in this spaceship can be driven. And we are at the same time the people that are in this machine, in this spaceship, and also the driver. And we can adjust, we can do something, upgrade, as it can happen for every machine. This is the heritage that we have from a super anthropocentric attitude. So around us, there is a world that can be simplified in order to do what we want, and we are at the center. And design is born in this kind of cultural framework. But as you know, this cultural framework now is challenged. First of all, because we discover that the complexity, you can have a different attitude, but it cannot be reduced. And for somebody as me, complexity is a value. So not only it cannot be reduced, but it has to be recognized. And we have to learn how to be into the complexity. But the complex system, by definition, cannot be driven. So we cannot bring a complex system as we want. It cannot be a kind of machine that can be disassembled. So what we can do, and this is the third position that somebody tried to have, is, and it's also my one, very modestly, that the change of the complex system happens because we have seen in the history the complex system change. But the change is not designed in the way that there is a group of people that design the future and that is the future. So a production of the future system, but to use a term of a person that is very important in my life and maybe in the life of many people that is gone away a few months ago, that is Bruno Latour, we can engender transformation. So we as collective designers, we are not designing something that can be done, because whatever we do is included in such a complex network of other elements, living or not living, so actors and actants, using the Latour terminologies, that what we can do, and we arrive to the final point, is disturb the system. Introduce in the system something that hopefully will generate something else that nobody really knows, but if we have operated in the good way, maybe we can create conditions to make something happen. I understand that I could be very abstract now, but I give you one example. If we work on services, and I use services because the complexity in services is much more evident than in products. Because, I have to run a little bit. Because in the services you have a human being inside, in the products not. So you can imagine the products relatively simpler. In the service you cannot, because you cannot reduce the complexity that is introduced in the system by the fact that a service is mainly the service encounter in between people. They do something together. Well, many people now is using the term design for services and not design of services, because you cannot design the service. You can create an environment that generate a certain conditions in which it's possible that the people behave in a certain way. But the maximum that we can say is possible, and if it is well done, maybe also probable. But in any case, the people that is intrinsically part of the service will be free to behave also in a totally different way from the one that the designer has designed. So I have 2 minutes now to go to what the designer can do. But I think that having said what is the change that we would like to do, it's not so difficult, and I can stay in my time. So rethinking design, in my view, asks for rethinking the very deep philosophy of what we do and what we are as human being and as a special kind of human being. So if we say, who are we, the designers, the answer, and emerged also by many of the presentations today, is whoever. Because whoever, not because people like to design, because if the things work very well, if I can go on with the business as usual, and the business as usual, all as the tradition tell you to do, if you do like that, why you should change if it works well? You are pushed to change when tradition do not tell you what to do. And so before there was a question between the difference between politicians and designer. Of course, there are a lot of differences, but the politicians are obliged to take some design choice because they cannot simply repeat what they have already done, facing the transformation that we have in front of us. The fact that we said, and that been said not only by me, but practically by everybody, that this human capability of designing is forced to exist, do the design expert, that is us, are needed or not? In my view, are desperately needed. So I suppose the idea that because everybody designs, what is our role, so maybe not, I think exactly because everybody designs, it's very important to have somebody that has been trained, that has been gone more in depth in some methodology, that have some ideas, that spend their life making experience, and can bring the co-design conversation with with ideas and with methodology. So for me, the first step is to imagine that today every design is a co-design, to accept that everybody is participating to a design, a co-design, and to find our position in relation to the other. That, of course, ask us to change something in relation to what has been the egoic way of designing in a certain moment. That was very coherent with a certain idea of modernity. And how we can do it? We can, I think, well, I'm running out of time, so I say only some titles. So what we have to accept complexity. And not only for me to accept, but to be very convinced that in the same way that when we talk about an ecosystem, the ecosystem is more healthy where it's diversified, where it's very rich, where there are so many different elements inside. Well, this is a metaphor of everything. So we should be promoters of complexity, especially in a moment in which there are strong power that try to reduce complexity, and reducing complexity means desertification. So how we would, in some way, enter in this complexity, but we should learn how to navigate into this complexity. Because navigating the complexity means, for instance, as I said before, assuming that nobody has the control of the situation. Nobody has the control of the result. You can never collect so many information to be sure that you have all the possible information, because the complexity of the system could not be reduced to any information, even if you stay years collecting information. So it asks you really to be designer, because being designer to be somebody that makes an ethical choice. So you face complexity. At a certain point, you have to decide, so what? What we have to do? We have to learn how to navigate. And how to navigate, what does it mean? Not to be overwhelmed, because if you are overwhelmed, we don't do anything. And if we don't do anything, we don't learn. If we don't learn, we cannot move in the transition. But to take our responsibility to cut in the overall big system some subsystems, knowing that they are part of a larger system, and to intervene in the smaller system that is possible as a kind of plug-in. So we introduce in the larger system something, thinking that maybe and probably this could generate conditions that are near to the one that we wanted. Thank you.